My name is Franz Fischer. I'm the director of the Venice Centre for Digital and Public Humanities. I would like to introduce you to Leonardo Campus, today's speaker and presenter. And Leonardo is currently working as a research fellow at our center. And he is a public historian, so par excellence, I would say. So on the one hand, he's a professional historian and university teacher with a PhD in contemporary history, awarded in 2010 at La Sapienza in Rome, on the Cuban Missile Crisis and the international perception, so especially in Italy and the US. And he published and publishes widely in academic journals and collections, and also 2 monographies. So one monography on the reconstruction of Italian identity through the Festival di Sanremo, under the telling title Non Solo Canzonette, so not just about songs. The other book on the perception of the Cuban Missile Crisis, so his PhD research, which has also been awarded with the prestigious Premio Friuli Storia, a national award for history books. On the other hand, Leonardo is working as a very active journalist, an author of television programs and web editor of various online formats on contemporary history. So working with and for La Rai, so the Italian state TV. And last but not least, I found in your curriculum now, or just now, that you are also a professional piano player with diplomas in performance and theory from the State Music Conservatory Casella in L'Aquila. So that's a nice fact. Here on today, you won't provide any music, but we will be talking about your research project here at our center about racial laws, so issued in Italy during the Fascist era in 1938 to exclude the Jewish fellow citizens from political, social, and cultural life, and eventually to justify also their deportation to the concentration camps of the German Nazi regime. And especially how these historical events would then after the war be remembered and communicated in the state television RAI. So the title of your talk is Italian Racial Laws, TV Coverage, History and the Public, and Investigation. Leonardo.
Great.
Okay, I put myself on mute as well, so we have no noise in the back.
So first of all, thank you for attending this seminar. Sorry for the inconvenience. Thank you to the Venice Centre for Digital and Public Humanities of Ca' Foscari University to allow me to carry out this research. I will try to outline it for you today. It deals, as you know and as you see, with the Italian racial laws, and in particular the TV coverage, the relations with history and with the public. And so it's an investigation on how Italy tried to cope with the memory of racial law and this black page of our national past. And this research will have outputs that are mainly twofold. One will be traditional. It will take the form of a scientific article in a hopefully peer-reviewed journal on the findings of the research. And the other would be more public and digital. The idea is to try to disseminate the research, but also, as we will see, to give some direct access to the sources, which are TV sources, and they are often inaccessible to people not working within the enterprises of TV. So this web doc will summarize the findings of the research and will be open access. The goals of the research will be, first of all, to try and contribute to the racial law scholarship, trying to fill a gap. There has been studies, of course, many studies on the racial laws, also some studies on the representations in post-war of the Shoah in cinema and also on TV, but not insofar specifically on the Russian laws. And so I will, of course, build on the existing literature and trying to say something new. The literature I refer mainly is Gordon, Holocaust in Italian Culture, Emiliano Sperra's works on the representation of Italian representation of the Shoah, and Gurish Vars on the Jewish community in post-war Italy. As I said, the research will be based on direct access to TV sources, and this will also allow me to really analyze the program, not just reconstructed by finding what it was written about those programs later in the newspapers the day after they were broadcasted. I think this makes an important difference. And this, of course, will be aiming at granting some accessibility to relevant documents like the audiovisual documents that are often inaccessible. This will be done in cooperation with RAI, so respecting all the copyrights and so forth, and we'll try to put into the web doc some extracts of the video, the relevant parts of the videos, to try to provide a sense of how the things evolved through times in the way of representing that phenomenon. And this hopefully will also will be a case study that will show the importance of TV as a source and of studying it as a source. It was often neglected in the past as not important, and instead it's very important to start studying TV for cultural historians, social historians, to understand particularly the memory of a nation, and in particular RAI's archives, because RAI is Italian state television, so it's important as a mirror of Italian cultural evolving identities. And of course, this will also show how not only the representation evolved, but also what's behind that. So the historical interpretation and the national identities that supports that those interpretation. This will also hopefully have a public value. That's the goal, to give a tool to understand this important page of our national past. That will be useful, hopefully, for scholars, but also for teachers and students, both in academia and schools, to pass on the knowledge of what happened to the younger generation, maybe in a way that will be easier and more attractive than only a scientific article. And this way, I hope also to contribute in small part to a greater awareness on this event, of this issue that's pivotal and is very recurrent, even in these months, in these past months. As we will see now, Russian laws are still a controversial issue. You could say, surprisingly enough, I would say that everybody would agree that it was a tragic page of our history, and everybody should agree on commemorating them and reflecting on how it was possible to do those things. But instead, that's not entirely the case. I'll show you some press clipping very briefly to give a sense on that. For example, recently a radio program by RAI was reading Primo Levi's books, and some of the audience protested, enough with this, Jews don't do politics. Like, you know, Primo Levi's was, or the anti-Semitism was politics in a partisan sense, in a petty sense, and not just culture, you know, and not just civilization. So this is a sign of things not working well on the front of memory. And this is another example. The town in the north of Italy of Schio declined to put the stumbling stones, pietre d'inciampo, because they say they bring hate and divisions. And then other cases, I won't dwell too much into it in order not to be too long, but there are many cases of intolerance and Nazism or philo-Nazism, anti-Semitism, act of vandalism happening in Italy recently. And this is another sign, street names being vandalized because these streets had been recently renamed to honor Nella Mortara and Mario Carrara, that were opponents and victims of racial laws. And before that, they were named after people who had signed the Manifesto della Razza. So that was found to be intolerable now, and they changed the name, but some vandals so otherwise and wanted to vandalize them. Another example of this is Liliana Segres, named Senator for Life. She's, of course, she's a survivor of the Holocaust, and she's very committed to the memory of the Holocaust and passing it on to the younger generation. And in spite of her old age, she's doing a great effort in doing that very effectively. And for that, she received tons of insults and even threats. And recently, the state had to assign her bodyguards to protect her. This is really unfortunate and very telling of the situation. And lastly, this is very recent. I found this very striking, no? That Corriere della Sera is the main Italian newspaper, and the readers of the newspaper wrote tons of letters to the newspaper complaining again about the visibility given to Liliana Segre just because she's a survivor of the Holocaust, they say, or they have enough of the Giornata della Memoria and so forth, or the commemorations. And so the journalist had to defend Liliana Segre and had to explain why it is possible to be against Nazism without being lefty. So this is the point we are at. This is the level of the debate. We have to explain the reader of the main Italian newspaper that yes, it is possible to be not lefty and against Nazism. This is a clear sign of complete loss of memory, I think, and this makes it relevant to come back to this subject and investigate it, how it was dealt with, how it was represented and narrated to the Italians through time. So I made this picture with some of the sources I used. We'll be trying to investigate in evolving memories through historiography. So you see many books on racial laws, but through TV sources. So you see a TV script pages and through digital tools symbolized by the mouses. And we will see that between history and historiography and the public debate in general, there are parallels. There will be a parallel evolution. So let's start first of all with a brief recap of the event. Racial laws have been, as you all know, the policy of the fascist regime since 1938, and they made a census of how many Jews were in Italy at the time, and the results were 48,032 Jews plus 10,000 Jews from abroad. But anyway, all this was equivalent to 0.1% of Italian population, total Italian population, which was 42 million at the time. So a very small community. The Jews, Italian Jews had, by the way, contributed very much to the Italian Risorgimento, so to the achievement of the national unity. They had fought bravely in the First World War, and they felt very, very integrated. They felt Italian. But in spite of all that, Mussolini, in the Discorso di Trieste, presents and announced the start of the racial legislation, saying that the Jews are enemy and should be separated and persecuted. And that results in 8,869 Italian Jews deported into the lager concentration camps, 7,860 of them killed, and that is equivalent to 1/4 of the total of the Jews present in Italy in 1943. Some of the left at the time. So 1/4 of the Jews in Italy was killed because of that. And this already confutes, I guess, the image of the racial laws of Italy being softer than those of other countries, or just on paper and not applied, and this kind of misinterpretations that have been gone through for decades. So this, for example, is the Manifesto della Razza. As you can see, it says the human races exist, also exist big races and smaller races. and lower, we would say greater and lower. And also it's time for the Italians to proclaim themselves frankly racist. And after this, you also see the propaganda at work with the magazines like La Difesa della Razza, and these are the results. So people starting to put signs in their stores, in the doors of their stores, saying these stores is Aryan, is not Jewish. This is a cartoon from the time recapping the content of the legislation. Like, for example, the Jews could not serve into the military service. They could not be owner of big buildings. They could not have Aryan domestics. If they were foreigners and they were in Italy, they had to be expelled in 6 months. They could not. There could not be mixed marriage between Aryan and Jews. The Jews could not be part anymore of the fascist party, which was at the time basically mandatory to work in many fields. They could not work in the public administration. They could not work in banks, insurance, and if they were teacher or students into schools, public schools, or university, they had to be expelled immediately. So these were the laws. This is a cartoon of 1940. That's terrible, of course, and this is how we will remember of Jews in the year 2000. And as you can see from the tag on the jaw, it says this is a facsimile of a bad race that lived through up to the 1940, and that it was then exterminated by people of great genius. So this was anti-Semitism under fascist regime. Let's go to the post-war representation of this page. It will go through 3 different phases, I would say. The first of all, we have to take a look at the corpus of documents. The corpus of documents is composed of 3,166 programs or sequences of programs mentioning the term leggi razziali, racial laws. We have to specify this also includes mention that are not related, like the racial laws in South Africa's apartheid or the US segregation, because it's just out of how the people that wrote the synopsis of the program through the decades for RAI used the term leggi razziali, and sometimes they used it for other things. But at the same time, so many programs in general in the TV, in the history of RAI TV, was not preserved, particularly the old ones. And so there are many programs that probably dealt with racial laws that are not included in the catalog and got lost forever. Let's see how this changed through time. From this table, you see that starting from below 1954, which is the year the television began its transmission in Italy, there were 0 pages of results with the term leggi razziali. So this started literally from 0. Then in the 60s, it's 1. Every page can contain up to 10 results. And when I mean results, I mean titles of programs or sequences of programs or synopsis of programs. So we will see that in the 50s, there was 1 program mentioning Russian laws, but it was not here because the synopsis and the title did not mention it. Anyway, 0 in the 50s, 1 in the 60s, 2 in the 70s, 4 in the 80s, 9 in the 90s, and of these 9 pages, so up to 90 programs mentioning Russian laws, 7 pages were dated after 1997, so at the end of the decade. Then in the first decade of the millennium, there is the explosion of this because it quintuples, and this is for a reason, as we will see. And then again, a growth in the last decade, the one just ended. Of course, it's not surprising that there is a growth because the channel multiplied. Now there are much more than just 1 channel or 2 channels, like it was in the past for RAI, but also the system of cataloging and preserving documents and preserving programs and videos has improved through time. But what is significant is the rate of growth. And that, as you can see, it gives already an idea of when the topic became much more important than the past. This is just a graphic showing the same data. So let's go to the phases. The first phase is we could call it the denial phase. Basically, people do not want to talk about it. The Italians and also the Italian Jews. This is for several reasons. I would briefly sum it up. One is the amnistia by Togliatti, the Togliatti amnesty in 1946. They basically pardoned the crimes committed by the fascist regimes and also by the partisans, just to, as the report said in presenting the amnesty, for the need of reconciliation and pacification of all the goods Italian, and the italics on the word goods are mine, buoni. It's important, the use of that word. 1947, 1953, twice the book by Primo Levi, Se questo è un uomo, is rejected by Einaudi, by the reviewers Cesare Pavese and Natalia Ginsburg. Natalia Ginsburg was, by the way, also Jewish. So it's another sign of a denial. They didn't understand how important was that book. So the book is published by a very little publisher, De Silva, and only in 1958 would be republished by Einaudi, this important Italian publisher, and would become the big testimony, the big success, translated all over the world, that we all know and we all cherish. But it took years to accept them. To accept it. And another case very emblematic is Gaetano Azzariti, that had been the president of the Tribunale della Razza under the fascist regime. So basically the man that helped decide whether you were a true Jew, and so you had to be discriminated, or half Jew or not Jew. And this guy is so compromised with the Russian legislation, was able to become president of the Corte Costituzionale, the Italian Supreme Court, in the post-war Italy, without anyone objecting that it was not possible for him to occupy that position. And he held that position until 1961, until he died, without any problems. And also, 1954 and 58, Amintore Fanfani became prime minister, and he was, of course, a sincere democratic, but in his youth, he had anti-Semitic writings in the 39 and 1941, and so this is just we don't want to, condemn Fanfani in general, or other people, Spadolini or other people, also even Aldo Moro has some anti-Semitic writing in his youth, but that's not the point of criticizing them. I'm mentioning them this to underline that so much part of a big part of the classe dirigente italiana was compromised, and so this made it very difficult for Italy at the time to cope with that black page of their past. So they all wanted to just remember, just forget, sorry, what had happened. After that comes the self-absolutory paradigm. That's how I call it. We could say that they start to talk about the subject shyly and more, but in a way that self-absolved the Italians from what happened. Let's make a few examples. 1956, the chairman of the Unione delle Comunità Israelitiche Italiane, Sergio Piperno, gives a speech in which he says, and I quote in Italian, "Tutti si prodigarono. Tutti quelli che in qualche modo erano in grado di seguire le mosse dell'occupante e dei suoi sgherri furono solleciti ad avvertire le innocenti vittime predestinate. Tutti gli amici, conoscenti, vicini di casa furono pronti a riceverli, a nasconderli, ad aiutarli. Tutti si affannarono a procurare agli ebrei falsi documenti e a sviare le ricerche. Tutta la cittadinanza di Roma, che salvo pochissime biasimevoli eccezioni, solidarizzò con gli ebrei ingiustamente perseguitati." So this was the view also in the Jewish community at the time. And 1961, the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. It has also the testimony of Hulda Campagnano, that also tells about so many Italians that helped the Jews, and this has some impacts in Italy. So they start talking about the Shoah, but we could say that they found a way to say, okay, but the Italian population had nothing to do with what happened. Actually, they tried to save the Jews how much as they could. And this comes at the same time, more or less, where there are the first mention of the Russian laws in TV. The first program mentioning Russian laws that we know of, that it was preserved, is in 1959, January 1959. It is actually the first big program of historical contents made by RAI. It's a 10-episode program on the last 50 years of Italian history. It's called 50 anni. And in the 7th episode of that series, there is a 7th episode is devoted to the 1938-1940 years, so that biennium. And in 30 minutes of that episode, you have 30 seconds mentioning the Russian laws. So we could say RAI starts immediately devoting some attention to the problem, but also very briefly and most importantly, setting the tone for the decades to come. Because the way they say it, the way they expose the problem, the issue is like this: they show Hitler and racist speech by him, and then they say, the speaker says, anche l'Italia, rinnegando una tradizione di fraternità tra tutte le razze di cui poteva essere modello al mondo intero, promulgò le leggi razziali. Ma il popolo, in ogni sua classe, comprese l'odiosa assurdità delle discriminazioni e non perdette occasione per dimostrare agli ebrei la propria solidarietà. Then there is a brief mention of Enrico Fermi, and then it says, sotto Hitler da tempo succedevano cose molto peggiori. So this is a sorrowful, if you want, but a self-absolutory depiction of the national past, and this sets the tone for the accounts that will remain dominant for decades. So basically this is called, we could call it, according to the stereotype, Italiano brava gente. That comes from a movie of the 60s, early 60s, with this title. Basically, the good-hearted Italian. So the Italian being more good-hearted than other people, and therefore helping the Jews more than any other people in the world. That's the idea that starts circulating. And after that, 1965, another important mention of the Russian law. Of course, I'm skipping some programs for reasons of time, but there is a Zavoli program, for example, in 1963, very interesting. But anyway, let's go to the 65. This program in several episodes on the anti-fascist opposition to the fascists. There is 8 minutes devoted to the opposition to the Russian laws. And this again argues that that was an initiative of the regime, was the fault of Mussolini, but the people opposed that legislation. And guess who was invited to make this point? Renzo De Felice. Renzo De Felice was the first historian to devote a whole book to the subject, with this Storia degli ebrei italiani sotto il fascismo, published by Einaudi in 1961. And he makes the point that, and he makes it in the program, so I might as well quote him. I quote the speaker saying, è un gesto di servilismo senza eco nell'animo degli italiani, come spiega lo storico Renzo De Felice. And then I quote De Felice saying, è veramente la campagna antisemita che a mio avviso provoca la prima grossa frattura fra il fascismo e il popolo italiano. And then the speaker again says, gli ebrei troveranno in Italia vasta solidarietà e aiuti. So this is the tone made by a very important historian that will become the most important historian of the fascism for many decades in Italy. We also have to take care about the audience, the impact that this program have, and this program in particular have excellent audience, more than 3.5 millions, and also the indice di gradimento is very high, above average of on cultural transmission and transmission in general, programs in general of the time, as it was recorded by the Servizio Opinioni of RAI TV. So it was appreciated by the public, and this program was realized with the collaboration of the renowned journalist Andrea Barbato, and had the consultants of consulency of two historians, Gaetano Arfè and Gabriele De Rosa, of respectively socialist and Christian Democrats views. And this is not a coincidence, in my opinion, because the political context is evolving, and there is a center-left, so they call someone from the socialist part, and someone of socialist views, and someone of Christian Democrats views. And now the tone is to the highlight is on the anti-fascism as a value unifying the Italian people of the democracy, and so the motivation for that is also for the opposition to Russian laws is being anti-fascism. This is another example from the Christian Democrats House organ Il Popolo in 1968. As you can see, this article says 30 anni fa il fascismo adottò le leggi razziali e le aberranti misure antisemite furono avversate dagli italiani. And the article also quotes a statement from the socialist Lavanti saying tutti gli italiani reagirono organizzando difesa e protezione dei fratelli ebrei. So this was the wide consensus at the time in Italy. And in the 70s, same music. Okay, another program in 1977 realized by the named historian Pietro Scoppola, investigating the relation between the fascist regime and the Catholic Church, concludes by saying with a small part of the program on the Russian laws, and Scoppola says, ma il razzismo suscita un diffuso moto di ripulsa nel mondo cattolico come del resto in tutta l'opinione pubblica e molti pronunciamenti ostili della Chiesa. So, again, same point, and again, very good ratings, 4.9 million audience watching this program. Gradimento very high, 68%. So then the year after that, Holocaust, the miniseries by NBC comes, and you're probably familiar with this. It is the series that popularized the term Holocaust all over the world. It had a huge impact in the US, but also in Germany. And it was broadcasted in Italy by Rai in 1979, prime time, with a huge promotion. It's suffice to say that it was twice on the cover of the Radio Corriere, the Rai's official news magazine, informing on the TV program week by week. And so they really well promoted that, and the audience was huge, because it was, I think, almost 20 million and the 80% of Gradimento. And even Primo Levi praised that series as accurate, fairly accurate. So as you can see, Holocausto, lo sceneggiato che ha sconvolto il mondo. So this kind of program brings about this other program. This is a 2-episode special program on the title Holocausto Italiano and Holocausto Italiano Perché, which is a debate. The first is just a documentary. The second is a debate hosted by the important journalist and authoritative journalist Arrigo Levi, member of the Jewish community himself, reflecting on the question of the title. So how it was possible that Italy had an Holocaust. So already there is some credit in starting to focus on that issue, but unfortunately the conclusion of the debate is against the same old one. Again, I can quote Arrigo Levi saying himself in the debate, abbiamo il fascismo, gli ebrei, e abbiamo l'Italia che reagisce, cioè gli italiani, le masse che rispondono poi in un certo modo che finisce per essere poi la resistenza, perché fu quello. Io sono ebreo, italiano, l'ho vissuto, tutti noi sappiamo che gli ebrei in Italia furono aiutati più che altrove, molto più che altrove. Gli ebrei si sentirono perseguitati dai fascisti, non dagli italiani. This is the words of Arrigo Levi. So the insistence on the resistance, no? So the position to Russian laws as a form of anti-fascism, and this, in my view, confirms what Emiliano Perra says regarding the reception of the series Holocaust, and that is that in Italy, Holocaust was a missed opportunity for a shift of interpretation. The times apparently were not ripe yet, and also in the 80s. Things do not change, and actually this is the climax of the paradigm reached by the TV program of 1986, Il coraggio e la pietà, gli ebrei e l'Italia durante la guerra, realized by Nicola Caracciolo, which is has just died, by the way, in the few days ago, and the Repubblica remember this program saying that it gave also the focus was all on the rescuers and all on the people being rescued by the Italians, and it's a two hours program in 2 episodes, and then a debate of 1 hour. And the point is made as clear as ever that the Italians went out of their ways to help the Jews in any ways, and it includes many interviews by people saved by the Italians, including Primo Levi, remembering the help he received by Lorenzo, also mentioned in the Se questo è un uomo book, and Elio Toaf, then chief rabbi of Rome, remembering and he says, I quote this because it's important. He minimizes the case of people denouncing the Jews, and said, yeah, there were someone doing that, but those were the exception, not the rule. The rule was people who helped the Jews, and those were just criminals who would have denounced anyone, not just the Jews. They were not anti-Semitic in this sense. And even among fascists, he says, there were rescuers, perché a un certo momento, I'm quoting him, l'umanità degli italiani aveva il sopravvento su quella che era l'ideologia politica. So here we can see a shift of paradigm, because the motivation for helping Jews is no more the resistance, is no more the anti-fascism, but it's just the Latin pietas, the good heart of Italians, no matter which their politics were. So there is a shift in paradigm, not randomly. The anti-fascism starts in its retreat, is starting losing importance, and so other motivations comes about. So there is a partial shift in paradigm, and of course the title it's emblematic because Il coraggio e la pietà. It's a paraphrasis of the French program Les Chagrins et la Piété by Marcel Olfeus, that was dating in 1969 and was censored by French television up to 1981 because it dwelt and it focused also on collaborationists of the Nazist regime in France. So it had a much darker picture. And instead, Caracciolo seems to say we were better than the French in a way. We were more about courage and bravery and pietas, and to help the Jews. 1987, Renzo De Felice, back on the subject, says in a famous interview to the Corriere della Sera that Italy, it's outside the cono d'ombra of the Holocaust. It's outside the black spot of the Holocaust, so it has nothing to do with the Holocaust, unlike other countries, and that the fascist can consider himself al riparo dall'accusa di genocidio, so and could not be complained for participating in any genocide, which now it seems very, very wrong in all regards. And the consequences of this very reassuring way of presenting things, what are this? In 1988, a program by the Jewish community, Sorgente di Vita, goes in the streets of Rome, in the Quartiere Prati, in the neighborhood Prati, a bourgeois quartier neighborhood, and ask normal people passing by, do you recall any Russian laws in Italy? There have ever been Russian laws in Italy? And everybody, well, 9 out of 10 that they edited, I think, says no idea, never, not that I know, no. And a nun passes by, a military man, students, old people, young people, women, men, nobody recalls anything. So this is the situation in 1988. This is the level of ignorance of what happened. But also 1998 is also the beginning of a shift. It's the 50th anniversary of the legislation. The parliament promotes 2 conferences on the subject. The Rassegna Mensile of Israel published the whole text of the legislation. So this is already an opportunity to see the reality of the laws, not minimizing them. Then in 1991, after a long research, Liliana Picciotto Fargion published this huge book called Il Libro della Memoria, where she reconstructs the fate of the Jews deported from Italy during the war. So this already gives an idea of how bad things went for the Jews, actually. Not all of the Jews were saved after all. So new researcher new researcher, sorry, and also a new political context internationally changes things, because with the end of the Cold War, the two political pillars of that interpretation, the two main political pillars in Italy, that is the Catholicism, political Catholicism, and the anti-fascism, they also they are both very weakened by the end of the Cold War, and so this creates space for other cultural trends to emerge. And also in the 90s, we have three very widely acclaimed movies regarding the Shoah. One is, of course, Schindler's List, winning several Oscars, being shown all over the world. I remember my class when I was in the Scuola Media was brought to watch this movie, and I'm sure it was not the only one. And so it was a huge success all over the world. Then in 1997, La Vita è Bella by Roberto Benigni, also winning Oscars, depicting, as you all know, the journey of and the deportation of an Italian Jew with his family, so set in Italy. And then Train the V, another movie on the Shoah, also in balance between comedy and drama. Anyway, three movies very successful on the Holocaust, and one also set in Italy. This, of course, creates more awareness on the Shoah, and this in turn brings about a new awareness more and more. So let's see. 1997 can be considered the year of the Shoah on Italian screens, not only because in movie theaters it opens La Vita è Bella, but also the TV and Rai devotes a lot of attention to the Shoah in several programs. One is the first emission on TV, first programmation on TV of Schindler's List, which has an enormous audience, and then a special on the 10th year of Primo Levi's death, and so forth, and also a program on Rai International. Well, I won't talk too much about this because I don't want to be too long, but the historian Giovanni De Luna here start confuting the idea that Italy has no responsibility for what happened, saying that the Nazis needed even logistically the help of the fascists to move the train for the deportation and so forth. And then particularly and above all, Memorie e sopravvissuti raccontano, this documentary by the Centro di Documentazione Ebraica Contemporanea, broadcasted on prime time on Rai 2, with very huge audience, 7 million, more than 7 million people watching it, with a very emphasis, with an emphasis on the survivors of the Holocaust and the deported ones. So we start hearing stories of people not being rescued, but people being deported, and this start to change things. I want to show you, if you have time, a small extract of this, so you get at least some direct access, at least to the audio of the sources, of course respecting the copyrights, but I want you to be able to listen to some of these witnesses. So let me, you have the link here. If you click on the title of the program, which is clickable, you can go and search for the minute yourself. You have it in the comments, but out of quickness, I'm gonna put the audio myself for you now. So you can do it for me a second, and I will show you.
Quando sono arrivate queste leggi nell'ottobre del 38, noi siamo rimasti sconvolti dal comportamento dei vicini, quelli che coabitavano nello stesso palazzo, nelle strade. Abbiamo visto la gente che guardava da un'altra parte o che ci guardava come se non esistessimo, guardava attraverso. Qualcosa che accade al tuo vicino di casa, della porta accanto, quello con cui hai diviso giorni lieti, tristi, quello con cui hai giocato, quello che hai invitato a casa a mangiare, quello col quale hai fatto una gita fuori. Da un giorno all'altro il buio più completo, il silenzio più totale.
Je insegnante, diciamo, mi esci perché da oggi comunque fare classi in questa scuola.
Mi fa, guarda, tu oramai dovresti andare ai media, non puoi più andarci, basta. E allora sono andata a lavorare, a fare la sarta, e andavo avanti e indietro con dei libri in mano per darmi le arie che andavo a scuola.
E quindi mi ricordo benissimo che uscito dalla classe e andai a piangere dalla bidella che c'era, cosa che molto affettuosamente mi venne lì con sé, cercò di consolarmi, eccetera, fino a che poi andai a casa e raccontai quello che era successo. Mio padre lo sapeva, se l'aspettava.
No, sono rimasta male perché io avevo, non so, qualcosa di bello su questa Italia. Poi quando mi hanno detto, non puoi andare perché sei ma non me ne rendevo conto di preciso cosa era questo ebraismo che era diverso. Perché per me era una religione, io ero italiana.
Oggi che, grazie a Dio, ho 10 nipoti, penso, e mi riviene nella mente, quando vidi un trasporto con circa 200 bambinetti piccolini che portavano le bamboline di pezza e così si avviavano verso i crematori. Il crematorio stette con la fiamma 2 giorni oltre il camino, circa 2 metri oltre il camino. Era carne tenera, era carne di bambini ebrei. Si sentiva l'odore per tutto il campo, si spargeva l'odore.
Okay, so you listen to these witnesses, and of course they are very emotional, and they give you a sense of the individual stories behind the persecution, and they are very different stories from those of Il Coraggio e la Pietà. They tell a completely different story, and of course that do not deny those who help it, but it starts giving the Italians something to reflect about. And also, we have to consider that, for example, roughly half of the arrests made in Italy of Jews were carried out by Italians, not by Germans. So the idea of only the fault of the Germans doing things is just not true. So these kind of things were started being shown, and the emphasis is on the survivors. The idea is to try to gather as much as possible the testimonies of the witnesses before it's too late, before they die. And so this is, for example, the final sequence of the documentary, saying per realizzare quest'opera sono stati intervistati 93 ebrei italiani sopravvissuti alla deportazione. Non tutti compaiono nel film, ma la loro testimonianza è conservata per sempre. So the emphasis is on the witness. There is also a book in those years saying called the l'ère du témoin, no? the era of the witness. So this is a factor in bringing about the turning point that comes at the turn of the millennium, increasingly, and is also evident in a documentary aired on Rai 3 in 2008. We won't go into that for time reason. Then new studies come along. For example, Michele Sarfatti, with several books. One is Gli ebrei nell'Italia fascista. Then the monumental Storia della Shoah in Italia in several volumes with many contributors dwelling on different aspects of the persecution. Simon Levi Sullami, Carnefici italiani, scene dal genocidio degli ebrei. The title itself, it's emblematic, it's self-explanatory. The Italian perpetrators. And then Filippo Focardi, Il cattivo tedesco e il bravo italiano, la rimozione delle colpe della seconda guerra mondiale. We could add to that in 1994 David Bidussa's book Il mito del bravo italiano. So starting to confute very strongly this stereotype of Italiani brava gente, no? Italian being better than the Germans and then the rest of the world in helping people. Also, the institutions comes helping this with new reminders. We could say a very successful initiative of public history, the stumbling stones, no? You go shopping around Rome, around Milan, wherever you are, thinking of other things, and then you run into this. You run into, here lived Giuliana Colomba di Castro, born 41, arrested in 44, deported at Auschwitz, and assassinated in 44 when she was 3 years old. So you are bound to reflect on things, and they want you to reflect on this thing, and this, of course, is very helpful. Also, the Giornata della Memoria, instituted in Italy in the year 2000, and then internationally by the UN in the year 2005. And the memory trains, the Treni della Memoria, bringing the students to Auschwitz and other concentration camps, using the trains, remaking the journey of the deportation in a way, reliving, if it's possible, with survivors of the Holocaust accompanying the students. And that's, of course, is an experience that young people will not easily forget and will shape their awareness on this subject and give civic values forever, for all their lives. And again, the stumbling stones that starts in 2010. So these kind of things, all these factors bring about a reappraisal on responsibilities that are very visible. I found them to be very visible in my research on TV in the years of the 80th anniversary and later. An example of this, well, I won't delve into this. I don't want to be too long. I just mentioned the fact that Liliana Segre, earlier mentioned, survivor of the Holocaust, is named Senator for Life by the Italian President of the Republic, precisely because of her commitment, not just of remembering the Holocaust, but on stressing the point of the indifference, the Italian being indifferent to the fate of the Jews, not the Italian helping the Jews, but being indifferent, turning a blind eye, turning the other side and pretending not to see, or maybe even taking advantage of the situation of what was happening to the Jews. And this also arrives on TV. I was mentioning the parallel between the public debate, the historiography, and the TV. So this is an example. Let me show you. Let me listen to you another extract, a brief extract of this program by Retrace. I have to specify that the other program I showed you, I made you listen, and this one as well are publicly accessible on YouTube or iPlay. So you can easily access it by using the link that is in the slides, as everyone else could. But let me start with the audio. It's an extract on this particular theme of the Italian reaction to the laws.
Ma la reazione degli italiani, in realtà, è prevalentemente di indifferenza e di omertà. Molti invece sono gli italiani che manifestano pieno consenso alla politica razzista e persecutoria del fascismo.
Noi ebrei eravamo considerati nemici, e se non nemici, collusi con i nemici. Tanto che si camminava per le strade e ogni tanto sorgeva una nuova scritta con scritto ebrei spie. Io me le ricordo ancora a Venezia le scritte ebrei spie. Ecco, spie di chi? Spie di che cosa? Noi non sapevamo perché ci accusavano di queste cose.
E moltissimi sono coloro che si voltano dall'altra parte e preferiscono non vedere.
Io ho visto i miei amici con cui ero abituato a giocare, naturalmente appena li ho visti sono corso nel prato per mettermi a giocare con loro. Ebbene, una mamma, come mi ha visto arrivare, ha chiamato suo figlio, lo ha preso e lo ha portato via. Un'altra mamma ha seguito il suo esempio e io nel giro pochi minuti mi sono trovato solo.
come accolsero gli italiani i provvedimenti razziali del fascismo? Non si dimostrarono brava gente, si dimostrarono italiani, cioè nel senso che largamente non credettero alla esistenza reale né di una razza pure italiana, di una razza ariana mediterranea, secondo appunto le follie definitorie del regime, però si adeguarono per non avere fastidi e si adeguarono, e quindi così in silenzio accettarono la cosa, e quando poterono più di una volta, cercarono di approfittare.
Okay, so this is also another extract. As you see, the point is made very clearly by both survivors, the speaker of the documentary, and a historian. And this is the writing on the wall at Milan station, Binario 21, track 21, where the train started to Auschwitz. And Liliana Segre was asked which word should we put on the wall, and she picked the word indifference, saying that this is the core of the problem. When you are indifferent, everything can happen, and you will not react, and you will allow this to be possible, and therefore be accomplice to these crimes now and in the future. So this is the message that the Italians are being fed with now, very healthily. And also in 2018, the 80th anniversary of the laws, this reappraisal become even explicit in a program by Rai Storia, the thematic channel, that devotes an episode of its program TV Storia to the Russian laws, inviting 3 guests, Dissemination, the Rabbi of Rome, so the most important member of the Jewish community and the leader of the Jewish community, and then 2 historians of the fascism, Emilio Gentile and Alessandra Tarquini. What happens is that during, first of all, the program itself focuses on how Italy coped with this page in the post-war. Okay, so this is a theme recurrent in the whole program of 1 hour, and then at a certain point, Gentile is shown the Renzo De Felice 1965 interview from the program that we've seen before, and where we mentioned was arguing that the Italians opposed the Russian laws, and that constituted a fracture toward the regime, breaking the consensus of the regime. And so Gentile is asked to comment on that extract, and in spite of him being, of course, one of the disciples of De Felice, the most famous one is currently probably the most internationally known and well-respected historian of the fascism, like De Felice was at the time, but he has to distance, we could say, himself from De Felice's interpretation of 1965, if defending him, even if he was his mentor. And he says, I quote, that quella interpretazione, that interpretation, a quell'epoca era una lettura che era condivisa da tutti gli antifascisti e anche da gran parte degli ebrei. Cioè l'idea che il popolo italiano era stato esente dalle responsabilità dell'antisemitismo, faceva parte della cultura di quell'epoca. Nelle successioni edizioni del libro, De Felice ha modificato perché anche la ricerca storica ha approfondito. And then again, when it's asked again on this Swift, this interpretation of Italiano Brava Gente, in another part of the program he says, questo storicamente non è più valido perché è stato accertato che il compromesso fu enorme. So, PV reflects on how it narrated to the Italians the memory of the Russian laws, and the historians themselves, different generation of historians, have to cope with, have to acknowledge that there has been a change in the interpretation, and the historical interpretation evolved. So this, in a way, closes a circle, in my view, in my opinion, and it shows that things are not anymore. The narration is not dominant anymore the narration of the Italiano Brava Gente, of Italian only helping Jews, is not dominant anymore. Things have changed, and of course there is much more to be done. We are not there yet, but we can see that things are changing in many regards. We end with some mention of fiction. I don't want to only focus on documentaries, because documentaries can have a smaller impact than fiction, compared to fiction. Fictions are popular narratives that are broadcasted usually on Rai Uno, so in prime time, very well promoted, and of course, because of their nature, they reach a very wider audience and a bigger one, and probably also a different one. People, ordinary men, that would hardly watch an entire TV documentaries with attention, but they could be very entertained by the fiction. So fictions set at the time and regarding the Russian laws can be very powerful in constructing memories, and national memories, or confusing things. An example of this, in 2001, the first year of Giornata della Memoria, Rai broadcast Senza confini il commissario Paratucci, which is the questore di Fiume, deported to Auschwitz, reportedly to have saved many Jews. Then in 2002, another fiction regarding Giorgio Perlasca, also reported to have saved many thousands of Jews from the Shoah, and as the title suggests, un eroe italiano, so a national hero. Both Perlasca and Palatucci's credits and acts were questioned later. But that's not important in my view now. What is important is that Italian national television wanted the Italians to see this story. So they were talking about Russian laws, but also again with the idea of we were heroes saving Jews, not sending them to death. And this had a huge success, particularly this fiction started by Luca Zingaretti. But also in fiction, things changed. Because, for example, just this January 2020, a mini-series on Rai Uno called La Guerra è Finita told the Italian public a much more complex story. Again, there is people helping Jews, this time in 1945, after the war, in Selvino, and that's a true story, also investigated by Sergio Luzzato's book, of help given to the survivor coming from Europe in this kind of farm in the countryside in the north of Italy near Bergamo, where basically these survivors of the Holocaust were helped to recover and to find a new life by a Jew and and other also Italian helpers. But there are not only the good guys this time. We also see in first line very evident that, for example, the protagonist, this female helper, her father was collaborating with the Nazi, selling weapons. So she has a very strong feeling of guilty because she lived in a very wealthy condition because of that, and she had not protested against his father. So she feels the guilt, and so she's making an effort to make up for it. And in a way, her profession is a psychopedagogist. So she's asking the survivors to tell what happened, what they've gone through, and they don't want to talk at the beginning. So back to the denial phase. No, it's not easy to tell. We prefer not to talk about it. We are not ready to tell you the enormity of what we went through. But she insists, and she say, if you don't say what happened, things will not exist. You have to say things for things to exist and to be relevant. So this is a transparent metaphor in my view. And the final sequence of this mini-series sees this farm in the countryside where they hosted and welcomed the Jews, the survivors, being used as a seat for the institutional referendum in 1946, where Italy chose republic against monarchy, so getting rid of the monarchy that had signed all the Russian laws without any doubt or sense of guilt or sense of decency. So again, welcoming the survivors brings about the country moving forward, accepting the responsibilities, trying to make up as much as is possible for what happened, not denying it, but moving forward and accepting the truth, which is also in a way the goal of psychoanalysts, psychoanalysis. So the character of a psychopedagogist is central in a transparent metaphor of how important it is to cope with the past. So this also is a step forward, I would say, also in popular narratives. And this brings me to my conclusion. What all these stories shows? Mainly three things. One, the evolving nature of historical interpretation. So what was believed to be true in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, and so forth, now it's considered inaccurate, and things change. This is the nature of historical research, and it's beautiful that it is so. Second thing, the difficult path that every country has to go through to confront the national past, and particularly the black pages of the national past. And sometimes it takes decades, and it will bring about resistance acts and refusals to do so, and so forth, but it's necessary to do so. Also, again, like in a psychoanalysis therapy, if you deny something, it will be coming back, haunting you forever. If you face it and you overpass it, then you can probably move forward, richer because of what you learned from that experience. And lastly, the importance of studying TV. I hope you understood that television is an important factor in not only representing the state of a culture, the cultural state of a country, and it's like a barometer, no? The Italian state television in registering the cultural temperature of Italy. So it reflects what's happening in the cultural debate and the public debate in Italy, but it also influencing the debate and the awareness. So it's important to pay attention to it. It's important to work well into it, and it's important to study television in this regard, in my opinion, more and more. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I wasn't too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Leonardo. So this was very long, but I think it was worthwhile every minute. And thank you for bringing all these testimonies of people who suffered to us, and the denial and the struggle for truth and against indifference. So thank you very much. We have now a lot of space, even if we are already a little bit advanced, for questions, comments. Please use the chat. So if you click on in the upper right corner on the bubble, speech bubble, so like in a comic, you can post a note, a question, or just say, I want to say something, ask something. Then I can give you the word, and you can activate your microphone, or I can read it also. We can read it all together. So that would be our way to have a little discussion now. And there's Deborah. So I try to keep track of the questions and people who want to intervene and ask something. You're also free, of course, to ask your questions and make your comments in Italian. So we decided to make this an English version because we wanted also reach out internationally. I checked the participants, so it's mostly Italian participants. So please feel free also to ask questions or make comments in Italian, of course. So Deborah, you're the first one to have a question. Oh, there was Daniel before. No, Deborah, then Daniel, please.
Shall Deborah go first?
Yeah. Okay, Daniel, then start you, and Deborah can look for the microphone button.
All right. Well,
okay,
thank you for this very interesting and important presentation about a very important aspect of our recent European history, and I was comparing what you said about Italy with how Hungary, how my country deals with its experience and of the Holocaust, and with the role of Hungarian society in the Holocaust. And there are lots and lots of parallels, except we have not proceeded as far in elaborating this. And I think that one of the reasons is not that people alive today were involved, but that it's just an enormous burden to admit that our society, that our state, that normal people in Budapest and across the country, that they contributed to horrible acts or performed some of them themselves as it happened. So I think it's a very hard thing to deal with. And I have one question. What is the relationship of the way this subject appears in Italian television to broader social discourse? And I think that one cannot take it for granted that the two processes, so social discourse and television discourse, go in parallel. And perhaps you have already said this in your presentation, but I'm curious whether you have something more to say about this.
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you want to know. There is a parallel. It's difficult to trace exactly the mechanism through which television and state television, public television, reflects what's in the public debate, except for the fact that I'm also a TV author of the of RAI. I was author, by the way, of one of the programs that I mentioned, the one in 2018. And of course, you have to, as TV author, you have to be aware of what's happening around you. You have to read newspapers, and hopefully you try to do something that is relevant for the public, and it says something new to the public. So, for example, when I was looking at the repertoire, preparing that program of TV Storia, I thought, oh, that would be interesting to show Gentile De Felice's extract, to see if he's in agreement with that, or if the interpretation changed. And so this is an example of me unawarely at the time, maybe helping a little bit to move the discussion forward. But I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, probably. But I thought, okay, since we have Gentile here, let's show him De Felice, which was his mentor, and see if things change. So this is just one example that I mentioned because I was part of it. But what can I say? Yeah, RAI has always been like this, but everywhere in the world, is not just RAI, it's not just Italy. I mentioned the fact that, for example, Les Chagrins à la Piété was censored in France because it was probably not good enough. Not good enough. Not the times were not ripe for the French public to accept that, or for the French institution to accept that. Maybe the public would accept it, but someone stopped it along the way. It took 12 years before it could be broadcasted. And similarly, I mean, in other countries, I know that there have been problems also with other subjects, and there are still so. Everywhere in the world, television is it's an important part of the public debate. And how that happened, probably, I don't know, by the effort, and not always in a good way, of course. Not sometimes. Sometimes we do bad things, or we are not up to the responsibility that we should have. We are not perfect, like everyone else, and of course, I'm just a little one of the freelance collaborators. There is people much with more responsibility, more experience, and more better than me in doing these things. So I'm just reflecting on things and on giants like Sergio Zavoli and so many other people. And of course, I would just say that the fact that RAI mentioned Russia laws for the first time in 58, 59, in the first TV program that they do, was in a way in advance in terms of public debate. The public debate was not there yet, but even if briefly, even if wrongly with the awareness of today, and only for 30 seconds, but it mentioned the Russia's laws, for example, much earlier than the textbooks of schools that only mentioned Russian laws decades after that.
Thank you very much.
Deborah, riesci do you manage to activate your microphone, Deborah Paci? Otherwise, there's a comment from Rita Maria Bucciarelli. Le sue testimonianze ci hanno dati spunti di riflessione. Sarebbe bellissimo ricordare questi eventi storici sulla evocazione dei linguaggi per una validazione scientifica. Non è una domanda, solo un commento. Then we have a question by Livia Katsentseva. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your. Do you want to read or say your question yourself, Livia? Click on your microphone. So I don't have to terrorize you with my German accent.
Se lo posso fare in italiano?
Sure.
Sì, certo.
Allora, io volevo chiedere se esiste qualche ricerca, qualcosa su come è cambiata la percezione e conoscenza del tema nei giovani durante tutti questi anni, o queste epoche storiche, che lei ha detto prima che per il 50° anniversario di queste leggi hanno chiesto per strada e nessuno se lo ricordava. Chissà, cioè, se c'è una ricerca, magari in che momento è cambiata questa cosa, se è cambiata.
Che io sappia, non c'è. Rispondo in italiano? As far as I know, there is no research on this. It's probably more a thing for the polls. Not aware if there is a poll on this. Probably there is. Maybe the Jewish community themselves. But what I wanted to do for the web doc, hopefully as soon as we get out of this COVID emergency, was to get back into the very same street of the program 1988 with a microphone, asking the same questions to the ordinary man passing by and seeing if 32 years later things have changed, if someone is more aware of what happened or not. If the results are the same, that would be very, very disappointing with all of the effort trying to overcome that.
Further questions, comments? Okay. There's a long questions from the Center Artistico Ali Cavallieres. If you want to read or elaborate on your comment, whoever is representing the center, please switch on your microphone.
Sì, mi scusi, non riesco a aprire No, volevo solo dire che sono rimasta molto impressionata dalla frase che non avevo mai sentito di Arrigo Levi, il quale dice: ma non sono cioè a perseguitare gli ebrei sono stati i fascisti, non gli italiani. E questa è una doppia negazione. È impressionante, cioè una vera doppia negazione. Cioè si nega al contempo che gli italiani siano colpevoli verso gli ebrei, ma persino che siano stati fascisti. Ed è in quegli anni lì, quindi la cosa era molto pesante. Ma d'altra parte la Arendt ci racconta subito dopo la guerra che i nazisti erano spariti e ha detto: guardate, non sono spariti, sono come un fiume carsico, cioè li rincontreremo, si sono affossati, ma non è che siano spariti, non si sparisce così. Un fatto che ha coinvolto 60 milioni di persone in Germania e i milioni di persone che ha coinvolto in Italia non sparisce, entra dentro, si nasconde, si occulta e ritornerà. E oggi molto spesso si sente parlare di antisionismo in termini che sono abbastanza impressionanti, a mio avviso. Niente, volevo dire solo questo, grazie.
I Sì, non c'è da commentare, penso, è una riflessione, non una domanda.
Ok, no, giusto. Yeah, right. More comments. There is Sara Buda. Prego. And then Paolo. Sara,
sì, buonasera.
Are you able to switch on your microphone? We can
you
hear you now.
me?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you hear? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So I would have one question and a comment. I wanted to ask, first of all, thank you. Of course, it was very, very interesting. There are only few studies on the cultural products that Italy made on this history. I wanted to ask if you had the chance to use the news programs on Italian television and to see how it was narrated, the history of the Russian laws, and if there is also an impact of the forecast of the cinema products, like the movie of Liliana Cavani, Portiere di Notte, or this kind of product. The comment I wanted to make relates to the issue, the historiographical issue of the silence after the war, which is a little bit more complicated, as few historians had the chance to illustrate in the latest year. I just wanted to mention a little bit all the memorialistic literature coming especially from the survivors of the Shoah. And that's it. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure I understood your question. If I had access to the latest program on the Russian laws?
No, actually, if you use as a source the news.
Yeah, the new up to 2020.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not sure if news is the English word for telegiornali.
The news. Okay,
yes.
Okay. So you mean how the Russian laws were presented in the telegiornali in the
yes. If you use it as a source, or you decided to not use it.
I don't think the telegiornali, as a rule of thumb, talk too much about historical issue if they don't have to, for example, promote a documentary being broadcasted after the telegiornali. Then they say, tonight it will be aired this very important special report program on the memory of Russian law, and then they talk about it. But otherwise, they could talk probably of episodes like those mentioned, like doors of partisan being vandalized or things like this. But I don't think there is a. First of all, it would be almost impossible to trace them, because there is no synopsis of them, and you cannot watch all the telegiornali from 1954 to now if you don't have the information that in that particular evening it was touched that subject. So this is a technical problem, and also it will probably be dealt very, very briefly and only by reporting what happened. Probably. It is true, of course, that telegiornali have different political connotations, and therefore would be interesting to see how the same news is presented by, for example, TG3, lefty, or TG1, close to the government, whatever that is, or TG2, second channel, sometimes close to first, before it was close to the Socialist Party, then to the League. So it will be interesting to see this, but it's very difficult again to find when they talk about it. You could go maybe through dates. If you find that an episode happened on one particular day, a very important episode, you could go and search for that particular day telegiornale and see if they mentioned it and which way. Everything can be done. We are just at the beginning of a virgin path, and we have so many things to so much way to cover.
Thank you. Ah, scusate, volevo solo, scusate se posso, segnalare alla signora che è intervenuta prima che esistono dei questionari, soprattutto a partire dalla fase appunto dei viaggi dei treni della memoria, e sono accessibili ora purtroppo no, ma a breve le biblioteche riprenderanno nel catalogo del CEDEC, del Centro di Documentazione Ebraica Contemporanea.
So, okay, I was not very far. I said that the Jewish community might have some data on that regard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paolo, you have a question.
Yes, I'll go straight to the question, then I add a very short comment. The question is if there are any studies on the awareness of the Italian people of the role of the Savoy monarchy in the Holocaust and the fascist regime, and how television covered it and is covering it now that Emanuele Filiberto is a TV star, by the way, of reality shows in Italy. And the short comment is this: there are 4 schools in Italy that are still entitled to Vittorio Emanuele III, to him, unbelievably so. And I promoted a petition on change.org with Professor Nicosia of the University of Palermo because 2 of those schools are in my country, in my town, Palermo. And you can believe it or not, but the teachers of that school refused to change their name because that was the name by which the school was known, and so it's a middle school. One is a middle school, the other one is a high school. So I believe there's no awareness of the fact that Vittorio Emanuele III, the third Terzo, was at the basis of fascism by the coup d'etat of 1914, which took us into the war, and by everything else. I'd be interested in knowing if there are any studies on this perception. That's another removal to me. Thank you very much. Oh, but thank you very much for this wonderful seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. Yes, there is some mention of the role of the monarchy in Russian laws. Particularly, I think in one documentary of the series La Grande Storia, they sometimes do several emissions on the same topic, but things change a little bit. So part is similar to something that they had aired in the past, and some is not, some is new. And in one of these cases, I noticed that there was also a few minutes in a documentary on Russian laws on the responsibility of the monarchy and how the Jews felt in a way betrayed by the monarchy because they were so close to the monarchy. Because the monarchy was also the Savoia, La Casa Savoia was the one that had, in a way, emancipated them in the 19th century. So they were close and very loyal to the monarchy. So having the king signing those laws without any problem was a bad thing for them, of course. As far as the streets' names are concerned, you have a very, very good point. We could mention that also Giorgio Almirante has many streets named after him in Italy, and then he was part of the La Difesa della Razza magazine, and also recently there was an idea, a petition to entitle a street to Bottai, the fascism hierarch, and then eventually they let it go. Like it was, just because it was cultural fascism, more interested in cultural issue, was a good or a heretician fascist or critical fascist. But then even the son of Giuseppe Bottai himself say, I don't think my father should serve a street for what he's done. And he was one of those guys in the session of the Gran Consiglio del Fascismo, insisting for the exclusion from the schools of Jews not to be taken out of the Russian laws, because he thought it was necessary to exclude them from the schools. So we could not have this kind of things. And I think Liliana Segre also protested recently against one street being named after Giorgio Almirante, if she was given the honorary citizenship of that town. I think it was Verona, maybe, I don't remember exactly. And she said, if you have that street of Giorgio Almirante, you cannot give the citizenship honorary to me, because these things are in contradiction. So this is another sign of how the subject is still very relevant, and the fight is still going on between wanting to forget about it and not know the past, or facing it and just get rid of it. But the effort by the Rome administration of changing names of the streets in Rome, from those who had signed the Manifesto della Razza to those who had lost the jobs because of the Manifesto della Razza, or had one of the professors who had not gave the oath to the loyalty to the regime, the Pledge of Alliance required to university professor, Mario Carrara. I think it's a step forward, no? Changing the names from two bad guys to good guys, we could say simplistically. But thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a short comment from Deborah, who is not able to speak herself. So she was wondering whether and to what extent the Italian national television was influenced by the VeDPH's interpretation. So, I mean, that's
a lot. A lot.
Which decade, probably? A lot.
A lot. It's sufficient to say that not only he was interviewed in the 1965 program, but also in 1986 in the debate of after the Coraggio e la Pietà. There were many people. There was Giulio Andreotti, Tullio Zevi, Nicola Caracciolo himself, Rigo Petacco, Furio Colombo, and many other important figures, and also Renzo De Felice. So he was consistently interviewed when it came to dealing with that subject until he was alive.
Yeah. That's very disappointing in a way. So such an excellent historian to have such an inaccurate picture of the past.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't want to be too harsh on him. You know, at the same time, it was the view of it was the consensus at the time, and I think we have to give him credit for first dealing with the subject with a whole book, big one, and he was accurate enough in saying the Russian laws were not imposed by the Nazism. There were no pressure from Hitler to impose that Russian legislation. Was a decision, free decision by Mussolini. So it's easy now in retrospect, I guess, to say that they got it completely wrong at the time. But we are all immersed in a culture, and sometimes maybe 50 years from now they will say about the things I'm saying today, "Oh, that's terrible."
Okay. Are there any further questions or short questions, short answers? Otherwise, we are already approaching the evening time. So one last question, maybe if no other person wants to ask something. So I'm always comparing the situation, of course, Germany, so how Germany is dealing with the past, and comparing this to Italy. And I remember my time when I was an Erasmus student in the 90s in Rome, and I had no clue how Italian fascism worked. So that was always strange to me. But now I see much clearer also how the situation was in the 90s, because it was always a little bit suspect to me. As regards, because your research is on the medium, the television. So would you regard this more as a mirror then of the society, or is it an actor who really moves things forward, or is helping to get to terms with history? So what do you see stronger, and where? So I see also a danger. So when I look at Germany, we are entering again a phase, or some sections of the society are entering the phase of new denial, or even of new anti-Semitism. And German state TV is, I think, doing a good job in general dealing with German history and the dark sides of history. But for the deniers, then these activities are then part of the system. So then they are able to exclude the whole thing. So to push truth and knowledge about history away. So that makes it easy. The more TV or media are trying to play an active role in dealing with history. So there's also a danger. So the more active you are towards a certain direction, you make it easier for your enemies to just exclude you, because, so I mean, we see it in the United States as well. So all these tendencies. So where Italian television right now? So is it more an actor, a mirror, or I don't know?
In general,
impression.
Yeah. Well, that's a very difficult question, and it's a question that I always
Sorry.
always run
Short
into.
Answer.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I will be concise. It's a question that I always run into when I'm, for example, teaching the course of history of television. It's always like, did Rai in the 60s and Bernabé's Rai influence the thing, or was just a mirror of the political situation, of the social situation of the Italy of my colleagues and so forth. So it's a question valid for every country, I guess, and every age. It could also be asked for the press or for other medias, for the internet. It's like we say in Italy, è nato prima l'uovo o la gallina. Was the chicken born first or the egg? And in a way, it's impossible to solve. I would say that I'm more inclined to say that TV and media in general represents the state of the society rather than changing it so much, because they have to follow the audience, also because of commercial reasons. That's probably not as true as for private television is true, for public television should be less true. That's not always the case, but anyway, probably they are more representing what's happening. And that's why I also put, press clippings of the 60s or books to make sure that people understood that it's not just television moving things, but television is immersed in a context. But of course, if they speak about something, it's already important. When they devoted a program to Holocaust Italiano, perché even if they didn't reach a different consensus in 1979, at least they devoted 1 hour of program debating the issue. That's already something important for Enrico Levi to have done, to have proposed that program, and not just saying, okay, that's the fault of the Germans and we are good guys and we don't care. So I guess it's the responsibility of everyone doing TV, trying to push the audience a bit farther, and it depends case from case.
Okay, thank you very much indeed once again for this long but very, very important seminar. So this was a nice and very informative roundup or closing of our spring cycle.